Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar on calculation and profitability. Today we're talking about the NaviTrans calculation and profitability, and next week we'll discuss the Power BI interface, but not today. As always, if you have any remarks or questions regarding this webinar, you can send them to my email address. And for today, we've just prepared the typical calculation of profitability with 4 cases. Then we'll have a look at the KPIs and the standard Excel templates. As always, we have to first go to the setup part. So let's have a look. Departments and calculation of profitability. And then setup. The reporting company, it's company limited, so keep that in mind. The reporting currency is, in my case, as standard as euro. And then the main and the most important part in the calculation of profitability is the dividing of your costs and services to your shipment. I think it's since the 2015 version. It's possible now to have the dividing factor on the kilometer and taxable weight and unit rent factor and kilometer. So in the past, it was only possible on taxable weight and unit rent factor. Unit rent factor is referring to your loading units. Could be pallets, Euro pallets, step pallets, boxes, whatever. Yeah. And now you have the possibility to make a calculation based on your taxable weight and kilometer, and also your pallets and kilometers. So that is very convenient when you have multiple partial trips. As for the setting up of your internal costs, it's up to you. In my proposition, I think the standard setup on the vehicle, trailer, and driver type is a bit limited. So you could set up a fixed cost a day or a cost per kilometer, and maybe also take into account the fuel consumption. But most of our customers would like to have some more detail. And in that regard, I usually set up, if I go to my basic setup, my types, and then again vehicle, trailer, or driver types, I set up my price calculation cost codes. Yeah. So you can either have a very detailed setup or the limited setup, which we saw earlier, but you cannot use both at the same time, of course. So you either use the limited one, cost per kilometers, your fixed cost a day, and maybe fuel consumption. But in my case, I have set up the price calculation cost codes, which you can find on any type of resource, or you could set up on one resource individually. What is great about this is that you really can divide your cost types in a variable and fixed costs. Some examples on the variable costs could be, of course, your kilometers and your fuel consumption, or, for instance, your maintenance, which could also be linked to the amount of kilometers. I made it very easy for myself. I set up a few cost codes, which is a standard functionality in NaviTrans, of course. Yeah. Just to set them up, create a new cost code, and then of course define which calculation method you will apply. So in this case, I only did it on kilometers and a fixed cost a day. There are some customers who think this might take too much configuration and setup, and then they might use the old version. But of course, they don't have the detail in which you have your, of course, your average amounts. So definitely show them both ways on setting up the cost calculation. So the detailed way or the very basic setup. Okay. Let's get to our scenarios already. Yeah, so this is actually the only setup you're required to do for the beginning now. So you set up the costs on a vehicle, trailer, or driver type, and then you can get going. Yeah. So the first one we'll have a look at is, if I go to my file consultation, is example 1, and it's basically 2 files. Yeah. that are planned together on one trip. And both of these files have a goods line filled in. Let's scroll down, which says €5 pallets, 3,500 kilograms, my volume, my loading meter. Now keep in mind, if you're doing testing and you're calculating, it's always based on taxable weight. So my taxable weight in this case is 6,000. It's not 3,500 kilograms. It's based on the taxable weight. So if you do testing, keep in mind it's always on taxable weight that it's calculating. So well, let's have a look at this simple case. It's planned together on one trip. So how does my trip look like? If I go to the trip card, I have one partial trip. With all the details in there. I have my loading, unloadings, and I have, of course, 2 shipments and 2 different files. Let's keep in mind the trip number, so it's 736. And let's have a look on how much profit I made on those 2 files, and how we did the deviation of the dividing of my costs. So let's have a look at the setup of the calculation of profitability again. Here we go. And the setup is now based on taxable weight and kilometer. So keep that in mind. So if we go to our trip, and the trip was during the time frame of the 29th and the 30th of September. These are the ones that we will discuss today, and they are now set up with the profitability module 1. I'll come back to the explanation of these modules, but just a short description of what it does is basically the view of your cost and results. But we'll get back to that. We'll just start on how the dividing is done of your cost and your results. So the one we will be discussing was 736. So that's this one. We have one partial trip, which exists of a total of 2 shipments. There's of course a split in costs, but there will be no split in revenue. And that's very easy why there is no split in revenue on my shipment, because this is the total amount that was set up on the file. So there's of course no split in that regard. However, there will be a split on my cost level. And we have a total cost of 405.33 euros, which is now divided over those 2 shipments. So now I can really go and see how much profit I made on each shipment. So if I go back to my shipments, you can see that on the first file, I've made this much amount of profit, and on this amount, on this shipment, I made a loss. So how did he make the dividing of the costs, which in total are 405.33 euros? Is very easy. Let's go into detail. And ask for my calculation details. So these are the costs that you set up either on your vehicle type, trailer type, or driver type. And of course, if you have toll costs calculated, which is based on the Xserver mapping tool, these will also be put in there. Let me just close this. And then you see this. What does that mean? How does he deviate the costs? Well, he calculates the taxable weight times the number of kilometers on the shipment, and of course we'll compare that to the full amount. So let me just quickly open an Excel and explain the situation. So we have in total on my first file, let's say this is A, we have an amount of 6,000, which is the taxable weight times kilometers for that shipment. Then we have our other one, which is the second one, calculation details, which is only 9,000 is 9,000 in taxable weight times kilometer is X amount. And then what he does is just he takes this cost and divide it, of course, by the sum of both. Let me just put them together. No, let me just make it a bit easier for myself. Sorry. Sum like this. And then let me just divide it again. So first part divided by this part equals 56%, or with the other one, it's 43.53%. Yeah. So where did it get these amounts from? Of course, let me just close this book and go back to my first one, which I calculated now. So we have the percentage, which is 56.47%, based so on taxable weight times kilometers, and then of course calculates it together as 100% and makes the deviation. Now the exact details of these kilometers are part of the shipment card. Yeah? So if I go to the shipment card, he gets the taxable weight in the fact box on the right side, and the kilometers were part of the X-server calculation on the shipment card. So it has nothing to do with the calculation of the kilometers on the trip. Keep that in mind. So over here you see the amount 143 kilometers. So the deviation of the costs is based on the taxable weight on the shipment and also the number of kilometers on the shipment. Let's have a further look at the cost itself. Calculation details. Make it a bit bigger, sorry. Now we see that I had costs which were a fixed amount a day, and I had costs which were based on the number of kilometers. Insurance, was a fixed cost a day, which is €9, which will be then, of course, again be splitted, over the two shipments. What about kilometers? Well, he will just, sorry, you have to take this one. Fuel. I have a fuel consumption of 1.07 euros per kilometer, and the real kilometers are taken over from the onboard computer. So he calculates based on the full amount, the full amount of kilometers on the trip, which results in a total cost of 291 cost and fuel consumption on that trip. But then again, if I look down on the shipment level, he will split it over. So this is the cost amount, which is this one. He splits it over based on the percentage that you calculated on shipment level. So that's very important to how you look at it. And of course, he calculates it on the real kilometers of the onboard computer and the real driving hours. But the splitting is done based on the taxable weight and theoretical kilometers on shipment levels. So that's very important to keep in mind. Now let's go to a second one, in which we have the case that again two shipments were planned on one trip, but there's a big difference now. This case is what the one we were talking about. In this case, there's only one shipment. Sorry, one file, 1266, with two shipments. And our other case, we had two different files with two different shipments. Now, if you plan together one file with two shipments, you will have a split in revenue. So let's go to my shipments. Revenue, is now splitted again based on the same, based on the same setup you've done before. Let me go into detail. Is taxable weight times theoretical kilometers on shipment. Same way of working. If you want to see them together, you can just scroll down like this, advanced lookup, detail, and again we see them together. So this is the way he split it up. And now I see for one file with two shipments on my trip, I see how we split everything up. So there's a different approach in it, of course. Keep that in mind. Let's go to our third example. And my third example is a very easy one as well. We have an outgoing trip, which has two files. Then we have an empty trip, and then we go back. So we go In total, let me go to the trip card, how it looks like. We have one partial trip, yeah, which contains 2 shipments of different files. Then we have an empty drive, and then we have our return trip. So the route looks as followed. We go load, load, unload, unload. We drive empty, and we go back. Now the distance, yeah, is calculated now by Xer, but of course, if you get back the real kilometers from the onboard computer, the calculation of profitability will use these. And of course, he will also use the real action times and the real driving hours to make the calculation. Now, for this part, it's always convenient to see how much did we make on our outgoing trip and how much did we make on our return trip. So the possibility you have now is you go to partial trips and you see that there's a split. Yeah. Again, for revenue, very easy. It's the same as before. If you have 2 shipments on one file like this, he will make a split. Yeah. If you have only one, in this case, it's only one in the outgoing trip, it's the full amount. Costs for the outgoing part, he again will split them. Yeah. Again, based on my percentage, which is calculated based on the taxable weight and the theoretical kilometers on the shipment. And all the costs that I have over here are, of course, the ones that are calculated, the internal cost during the trip. Yeah. What about the empty kilometer costs? It's up to you. You can say, okay, I will put half and half. I will put a part of the internal costs of the empty drive on the first partial trip or on the third partial trip. And in my case, I've put everything on the return trip. So let me filter on this one, filter to this value. What we see now, these are all costs that are directly linked to the empty trip. So there's nothing loaded anymore. Yeah. Sorry, there's no units that are being transported, and this is the amount that I get. Now the splitting of over these 3 partial trips should be done via the calculation and profitability setup and then departments. You have the possibility over here to calculate the empty cost on an outward journey. So if you put it on 100%, of course, all the costs of the empty driving will be put on the first part. If you put in 0, it's all on the last part. If you put in 50, he will deviate, make the dividing between the partial trips. Let me give you the example. Let's just have a look if I already set this one to fixed, but I don't think so. Yeah, I did. I closed it already, but let's keep it that way. But just keep in mind that you can calculate the empty kilometer costs and have a look at it, how much profit you made on the first part of your trip and how much profit you made on the last part of your trip. So that's very easy to set up. Okay, example 4 is a bit different. The original shipment looked as followed. Let me go to the shipment card. It's basically one, we have a loading, yeah, and an unloading, and then NaviTrans added, based on the depot rules, a depot, yeah, which we now have, of course, 2 movements, our collection and our delivery. Now, in this case, I've decided to do the collection with my own resources, and the delivery I do with my by the subcontractor. Okay. So the first part of the trip was executed by my resources and gets number 742, and then the delivery was done by another party, is 43. Now let's have a look at it, how he reacts to everything. So the first thing you need to know is that if I now would change to my model 2, yeah, is that for the first part of this one, my collection, I have my variable costs, my fixed costs, and total vehicle costs and so on. And then for the last part, I don't have any costs related to my resources because that's one that I've just outsourced. Yeah. Of course, if you then want to see of both trips, how much profit that I made in total, let me go back to model 1. You have to group it like this. Yeah. So now I see the full amount and the result as well. So let's say that the revenue is split it again based on the weight and kilometers. Yeah. So this part, the collection was about 50 kilometers. And then for the delivery, it's the same weight, of course. We did more. Yeah. So automatically, NaviTrans will give more revenue to the delivery part. What about the costs? As I said, the first part we did with our own resource, in which I get a detailed view of all the costs that were involved by using my own resource. Yeah. And then I had the full amount of 122 euros. And then for the delivery, I used a subcontractor, which I only have one amount, yeah, which is this one, which was a fixed price for a charter. And then I get the result. Yeah. But of course, if I want now to see the full profit that I made on it, yeah, then I have to group it together, and then I see the view like this. Yeah? So I see it's minus 26 instead of 32 because I have profit on the delivery part. Now, in the past, they used the fictive and fictive revenue for these calculations if you had via depot, but of course now you can apply the kilometer calculation, so it's not required anymore to use fictive negative and fictive positive revenues. So you can just use the calculation on kilometer and just group it if you want to see it together, what you made on the collection part and the delivery part. Yeah. What about these models? Let's go back to the models itself and on how you want to view your setup. I'll just make an easy one in which I say, okay, I want to see my amount. Let's go ahead. Let's say I just want to see my costs, my revenue, my profit, and maybe my depot costs in a separate way. So what I can do is I just create a label like this, say revenue, which should be the first thing I see on my model. And I want to see my revenue. If it's positive, I want to see that it's, of course, well, it's always, say it's favorable. Yeah. What do you want to see as the total revenue? Yeah. If you don't only want to see a part of the revenue, you can just decide what you like to see. What about my costs? Let's say I want to have a bit of different setup in that regard. Let's say I want to see only the type costs like this. Yeah. And then let's say, okay, I'll take everything as well. This should be not presented in that way. Let me just check. Put it on standard as well. And then I want to have my, let's say, profit, yeah, which is of course the sum of my revenue and my costs. So very easy again to set up. And then separately, if you want to see your depot costs, will I explain immediately, you have to set up a new line and then decide, okay, depot costs. Yeah. I talked about the fictive positive revenue and the fictive negative revenue. We did this in the past if you were not, because you were not able to calculate based on kilometers when you had a collection and delivery. So now this, you don't really need to use this anymore. Okay, so that's a very basic setup, yeah. And let's say that I want to see my profitable. If it's negative, I want to see it unfavorable, and if it's positive, I want to see it in green, which is favorable. That's it. The more detail you set up, like in Model 2, yeah, the more you will see, of course. If you also want to see the variable vehicle cost, it's the same way. Just go set up a label, go into detail, go to your costs and decide for your vehicle variable costs. Yeah, but of course on the price calculation setup, you need to set it up as a variable. Okay, let's have a look now to my trips again and choose my Model 3. There we go. And if I now filter on the date, All right, 9, 39. Okay. So what I've got now is that I again see if revenue now it's not shown, but doesn't really matter. But of course you would see your revenue, you see your cost, you'll see your profit. If it's negative, you see it in red. If it's positive, you see it in green. And as I said, your depot costs have to be set up separately. So our last part, 742, I had my collection and my delivery via a depot, and he put in depot cost on the first part, and then of course the depot costs on the delivery part. This is the internal calculation. How can you add this depot costs? Well, basically you go to your setup, you go to your depot tariffs, yeah, and then you choose which depot on which depot you will put in the handling costs. So in my case, it was Depot Brussels, and I've put in one fixed. No, I have to check. I think it's this one, but it doesn't really matter if it would be put in there. Just add like a cost code, depot handling, and maybe a fixed amount like this, 15 euros, or use a tariff table or however you want it to be. Yeah. So there's a lot of ways to set this up. Your cost, your internal costs. It's up to you how much detail you want to put in there. Just don't forget to tick off this box. Yeah, if you want to see the all detailed costs of a total trip. Now, most of the customers will also look on file and shipment level. Yeah, I've shown you this. And of course, on vehicle level, it's always easy to say, okay, show me the profit of my vehicle for a month like this, yeah, up until now. Or you could go and have a look on your customer level and also just say, okay, show me how much profit and cost I have per customer. Yeah. So again, very, very easy to set up. The other filters were on plan sub-department. Of course, you will have to appoint your resources to these departments. That's about it for the calculation and profitability, but it's actually very simple. And for the detailed calculation, you can always have a look at our manual. Let's have a look at the KPI dashboard. So KPIs, let's go and have a look at it. You can just create a new one, and I've prepared one which is based on empty kilometers. A KPI, just give it a new unique code name, empty kilometers like this. I will have to define a source ID. So in my case, I will calculate empty kilometers, and you just have to know where to get the data from. And empty kilometers, you know this, you will find this on the partial trip. If there's a table not available over here, you can always add another table. Yeah? So go and have a look at it and just add it if required. So I just take my table partial trips and I will fill in my target and I can say, for instance, for empty kilometers, they cannot have more than 2,000 of these. Yeah. And of course, my target type should be less is better. The less empty kilometers you have, the better. Now measuring, what will I measure? I will measure the empty kilometers. So there's a system code for that, and the system code is empty kilometers. Like this. Then I will, of course, want to see the empty kilometers I have per vehicle. So then you have to set up the dimension. And the dimension is, in this case, a field. Why? Because he looks at the fields which are part of the data in the table of the partial trip. Yeah. So I look at the fields of this table. Yeah. And the field is, of course, vehicle. Like this. Here we go. You could put in another dimension. Why would you do that? You could say, I also want to see it based on a quarterly overview or monthly. Then you could put in another dimension. Yeah, so you see the results grouped per vehicle, but also per month. What else is important? Say allow manual calculation, save the last calculations. let's say also the results should only the top results, and then I also want to see my averages and my target. So this is regarding the visualization on a chart. So how does it look if I go to my chart? Sorry, I first have to calculate my KPI. So manually, yes. And then I have the results. So these are all the vehicles that are in my master data currently. And you see that if I have a thumbs up and a thumbs down, which was based on my target. If I now go to my chart, it will be easier to explain. So these in red means that these vehicles have quite a lot of empty kilometers and are above the target of 2,000 empty kilometers. The ones that are below are shown in green, yeah. And over here we have the average. So 729. The great thing is about these KPIs that if you have the results, you can always drill down on it and see what trips were executed, which department did the planning, with vehicle, of course, the trailer that was involved, and so on. Yeah. So these here I have my distance and my trip details. To set up these KPIs, as you saw, it's very easy, not too much setup required, but of course, let's say the end users will need a bit of basic training in the beginning. For the KPI dashboard, how you set this one up, this one is empty currently. Basically, you go to the customizing, customize this page, add a chart, maybe add a list, move this one left and right. And I will just put in the same KPI we created now, empty kilometers, and then empty kilometers over here as well. So in this case, it's shown as a list, yeah, thumbs up, thumbs down, and in this case, it's just shown as a chart. Any chart modification can of course be done with the settings, in which you can decide to go for a, let's say, a bar diagram, maybe show the value above, show a legend as well, click OK, and then you get a different result. Yeah, so very, very easy to set up and very user-friendly. Now, in some cases, this might not be enough, and they want to see more data in a report. And to ensure we have this, we've built the Excel template functionality. And the Excel templates functionality is part of the Office integration. It's not used a lot, but I do get some cases in which I am not able to create a report with the basic KPI module or with our calculation and profitability. I think last time I had one in which they asked me to compare the booked vs the actual dates, in which I mean, let's go to a file, and doesn't matter which one I take. Let's take this one. So let's say this is a shipment of 26th of September. The execution was asked to be done on the 26th of September for loading and unloading. When this is planned, the actual load and unload info will be automatically filled in. Yeah. But what if this was not done on the 26th, but on the 27th? Yeah. So let me just change it. And this one as well. So the original booking was based on the 26th, yeah, and then the actual load unload info, which we get back from the onboard computer, says the trip was planned and maybe operational finished on the 27th. Now, to start comparing this, and maybe also for the service and level agreements, you need information actually of two tables, right? So I needed table information of my files, yeah, which is these and the shipment. And I need table information of the actual load and unload info. So this information, customize this page. Oh, sorry. How about this page? I need information of this table. Yeah. Now the great thing is with the Excel templates, I now can start building a table. It's comparable like to a query in Excel. I just can combine the data. So if you have a look at our Excel again, Excel templates, I started from my master table, which is my shipment. Yeah, I gave it and say when I export it, I want all of the columns to have a header, and the header should be in bold, underlined, italic. Yeah, I decided that when I exported it should open Excel. Could also save it in a file or in a PDF. You decide which path it should take, and I also set up the file name for the export. Yeah. Currently, you have to run this manually, the export, but I already send a request to our product team to maybe have it done via a job queue. So you have your reports generated for you at any given day. What about the template? So the master is my shipment. And as I said, I need information of two other tables. So on the shipment level, I took the fields shipment number, loading date, and unloading date. And for filtering purposes, I want to see all the shipments of August up until now. Yeah. On the file level, I want to have the file number and the customer name. And then the other table I had was the actual loading date from and unloading date from. Yeah. And then I gave it a unique column title name. So you can always change the column and the title name. What about the relations? Yeah. If this is your master table and you want to have a relation with another table, you just have to set up the table properties and define which link you will have. Yeah. Of course, it's with shipment. It's convenient to, of course, have the relation based on file number. Yeah. And for the additional shipment info, it was based on shipment number. So these were the two relations I've set up. How does it look now if I just go to export to Excel, and this was the filter that was already set up? I just click OK, yes, and I have my result soon. Here we go. So now the convenience is that I have all my files sorted, my customers sorted, the shipments, the booked date, when it was actually sent, and then the book date which refers to the ordering date, and then the actual date when it was executed. So you could always compare this, and if necessary, use the if function and maybe say yes or no when it was on time or too late. And the other one that I commonly show as well is the one that is based on route revenue. If you want to see how much profit did you make on a certain route, I set one up that I said, okay, show me all my files from now with the end address in, let's say, Denmark. I click OK, and now he goes picking up every file with a destination in Denmark. Yeah, and I get an overview with all the ones on based on financial status, operational status. I didn't really mind, but I have now all the services and weight calculated. And the great thing about this Excel is that you immediately can put it in a pivot table. Maybe decide that you want to have it. Let's say I want to see based on the unloading location and the services like this, values, and then maybe per customer in my columns, principal name, or here we go. So this will now show me quickly how much per customer, how much profit I make with a certain end address to a certain end address. Yeah. So these are Excel templates, again, there's a manual for it. Easy to create, will allow you to combine data from multiple tables and get a nice result. And it's, of course, is less time consuming than developing everything, but will require a bit of training for the end users. So that's about it for today. Again, if there are some questions or remarks, just send them or email them to me, and then see you next week for the Power BI webinar.